Up next in the broadcast, oil prices fall again on the global market to a 5.5-year low. And while that's great for oil importers, analysts say the shock on oil exporting economies may reverberate into another financial crisis. Hope builds for the recovery of the black box of the AirAsia plane that crashed into the Java Sea last month as Indonesian authorities locate the tail of the aircraft underwater. And how does 2015 look for Korea's major industries? We have the analysis on how the major players are adjusting their game plans to counter heavier global competition. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News, coming to you live from Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Well, cheap oil and its potential effects continue to grab the headlines. U.S. benchmark oil slipped below the $50 per barrel mark on Tuesday, and it's low not seen in more than 5 years.
Exactly, and experts are saying this downward trend is moving things toward financial troubles in oil exporting countries such as Russia. Our Kim Min-ji starts us off.
Another oil shock. Global crude prices plummeted to fresh lows on Wednesday over mounting concerns of oversupply and sluggish global growth. Benchmark Brent crude temporarily fell below the symbolic threshold of $50 per barrel for the first time in 5.5 years. U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate also traded at less than $48 a barrel. Crude prices have slumped almost 10% this week alone and have lost more than half their value since mid-2014. Although the price cut could help growth for some economies, a joint analysis by state-run Korean think tanks is not ruling out the possibility of a financial crisis in countries that are heavily reliant on oil exports. The study added that financial troubles in these countries, such as Russia and Venezuela, could have spillover effects on emerging economies, including Korea, especially when coupled with a U.S. rate hike down the road. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Despite those concerns, however, Korea's Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan disagrees. He says the drop could actually help the Korean economy by bringing down prices of imported raw materials and eventually perking up a domestic demand. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan has dismissed concerns that falling oil prices could lead to deflation. In fact, he says the declines could actually help boost domestic demand as the prices of imports fall. At an economic ministerial meeting on Wednesday, Choi said that the decline in oil prices is fundamentally different from deflation, which occurs due to a shortage of demand rather than an oversupply. He also cited projections from 5 state-run institutes, which forecast that Korea could save $30 billion in oil import expenses if crude prices maintain an average of $63 per barrel. His remarks came amid concerns that deflation is spreading in the Korean economy, currently struggling from sluggish domestic consumption and low inflation rate increases. Some local institutions in Seoul even compare the recession in Korea to that of Japan's long-term economic slump in the 1990s. In response, the finance minister said that the government would increasingly pursue policies to make sure the benefits stemming from falling oil prices help boost domestic consumption and thus the economic recovery. Also during the meeting, Choi vowed to pursue policies that would boost financing from venture capitals and for high-tech innovative industries. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The finance industry was once booming sector. It was an industry where you could easily make a fortune if you had the right qualities. But now it's become much more difficult to see people in this sector make big money, at least here in Korea. It's been actually letting go of a lot of people instead. Ji Myung-gil has this report.
Since the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the government has repeatedly set the ambitious goal of turning Korea into one of Northeast Asia's financial hubs. Yet latest government data shows the industry is in fact shrinking. Over the past 12 months alone, some 24,000 jobs have vanished from the country's financial sector. Statistics Korea said on Wednesday that the number of people working in the industry fell to 840,000, or about 3% of Korea's overall workforce. That's down nearly a half a percentage point and the lowest in 5 years. Despite the government's plans of turning the financial sector into a major growth engine, it only accounts for 5% of Korea's GDP, down from 6.5% in 2008. Industry experts attribute the decline to poor performances by stock brokerage houses that have been forced to cut back in recent years. Banks and life insurance companies have also sought mergers and acquisitions in the past year as part of restructuring aimed at sharpening their competitiveness. The job market for the financial sector does not look bright this year either. Financial analysts say that although the sector's performance will likely improve this year thanks to a steady economic recovery and the government's deregulation drive, many industry players will have to focus on overhauling their businesses to regain their competitive edge. Experts are calling on the government to speed up streamlining red tape to encourage the financial industry, to provide funds more easily to the corporate sector and reduce its reliance on providing household loans. Kim Young-git, Arirang News.
Get ready to hear President Park Geun-hye's vision for 2015 at her New Year's press conference next Monday, marking her second time to stand before Korean and foreign reporters. The president will unveil her policy direction for the year, which will focus on revitalizing the economy and boosting inter-Korean relations. There will also be a Q&A session. Arirang TV will bring the press conference to you right here live as it happens. According to North Korea, the continued campaign by South Korean activists to fly anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border could impede improvements in bilateral relations. If the launches continue, the regime says it has no plans to engage in talks with the South. Hwang Sung-hee reports on the ongoing controversy.
North Korea warned South Korea on Wednesday to stop private groups from flying anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border if it really wants to resume dialogue. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency said South Korea is challenging North Korea's sincerity for improved bilateral ties and spoiling the mood for talks by turning a blind eye to the leaflet launches. 2 days ago, a group of South Korean activists flew 600,000 leaflets that criticized the North Korean leadership. Putting an end to the leaflet campaign was one of the preconditions to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's apparent proposal for talks in his New Year's speech. South Korea has refused to step in, saying it has no legal grounds to ban acts of freedom of expression. But Unification Ministry spokesperson Im Byung-chul said Wednesday the government will try to prevent the situation from getting out of hand.
We will cooperate with police in implementing safety measures to reduce possible dangers to the lives and property of our people.
A local court ruled Tuesday that authorities can restrict the leaflet launches if they jeopardize public safety. In October last year, North Korea opened fire across the border in an attempt to shoot down the balloons that were carrying the controversial leaflets. The Unification Ministry once again called on North Korea to accept its proposal for talks with no preconditions if it's serious about improving inter-Korean relations. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Local authorities this Wednesday say a former vice president of Korean Air, Jo Hyun-ah, will face trial over her so-called nut rage incident. Prosecutors indicted Cho on charges of violating aviation safety rules, coercion, and interference in the execution of duty. Cho stands accused of ordering a commercial airliner to steer back to the terminal gate in order to deplane a head steward after she was incorrectly served a bag of nuts. It's also alleged that she sent Korean Air officials to the head steward's home, demanding that he falsely testify about the incident.
Many new gadgets are grabbing attention of tech enthusiasts around the world at this year's annual Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. What's different this year, though, is that cars are stealing some of their thunder. Connie tells us why.
Take a look at what's driving this year's Consumer Electronics Show. Or should I say, take a look at who's driving. Well, in this self-driving F-15 Mercedes-Benz, no one is technically driving. It just carried the president of CES to the show.
You know, it's a very odd feeling to totally give up the wheel to a robot.
The car uses radar and ultrasonic sensors to drive itself.
30 years ago, I was seeing these pictures and was dreaming of these kind of cars.
This car is not only able to determine when it's safe to cross the road, it also actively tells you when it is safe to start walking across.
Blue LED lights inside the white leathered interior signal touchscreens that control light and temperature, and you can even watch movies or hold video conferences sitting on these swirling chairs. Driverless cars are getting a lot of the attention this year, with Germany's Audi arriving to Las Vegas by itself from San Francisco. However, there are other automakers emphasizing their cars and their connectivity at the show. The Hyundai automobiles on display here come along with Hyundai's BlueLink smartwatch app. The voice-activated app allows Hyundai drivers to remotely start and stop the engine, lock and unlock doors, turn on the emergency lights, or call for assistance. And BMW has debuted cars that act as their own valet. After dropping off its passengers, these connected BMWs can park themselves on command from a smartwatch. However, the most anticipated technology for consumers may be the driverless car, which experts say could hit the market within the decade. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The fiercest battleground for global TV manufacturers this year is going to be in Asia. Research firm Display Search says the TV market of the Asia-Pacific region is projected to grow 7%, more than double the global average of just a little above 3%. Japan is forecast to have the highest growth rate of TV market at nearly 11%. The researcher attributed this estimated surge to the country's aging population, who spend more time watching television.
Couples saying "I do" in Korea have traditionally divided housework by gender roles, and despite the modern world exerting changes on this historical pattern, it appears that in practice women still do more of the household chores. Shin Se-min explains how the husbands of Korea may be lagging behind a global trend.
A long-lasting, healthy, and happy marriage requires work, real work. But in Korea, at least, most of that work in the home is being done by women. A report from Statistics Korea shows how house chores are distributed among heterosexual married couples above the age of 20 in 12 different countries. Using data from the International Social Survey Program, the survey took 6 different tasks into account, including grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, and caring for family members who are ill. Discrepancies could be seen between the participation rates in each of the 12 countries surveyed. But Korean husbands were second to last in terms of pulling their own weight, behind only their Japanese counterparts. Compared to European hubbies, although many European countries are known to have systems designed to promote gender equality, Korean male spouses are doing just about half the amount of housework. A researcher who helped put the report together says Korean society has a lot to do with it.
The traditional way of thinking still carries on to this day, that males go out and make money while females stay at home and do housework. But if this continues, it won't just stop with the burden of house chores. In a greater picture, it could eventually slow the growing of women's economic participation rate.
Hong acknowledged that more younger Koreans are open to gender role equality compared to their parents' generations. She also added, however, that as the times are changing, so should Korean husbands, especially with more wives now working outside the home in jobs of their own. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Continuing with our 2015 Outlook series today, and we're going to talk about corporate Korea tonight. Korean companies put on a stable growth back in 2014 in terms of outbound shipments as well as R&D investments, but will they maintain this momentum in 2015?
For a preview of this year, we're now joined by Arirang News' trade and industry correspondent Song Ji-sun. So, Ji-sun, let's start off with the big picture view for 2015.
Well, I believe Korean companies fared relatively well because the global demand was slow and the domestic recovery was slow here in the home as well. But the outlook for this year was not at all that bright either. Now take a look at this Trade Ministry's 2015 forecast for exports by industry. The machineries and semiconductor industries are expected to enjoy growth this year, backed by steady demand from the U.S. Free trade agreements struck with a dozen countries in recent years have also given a boost to the auto parts, and textile sectors. But handset makers will be faced with tough competition in the global market, especially in China, where cheap local manufacturers like Xiaomi and Huawei are quickly gaining ground on Samsung and LG Electronics. Now, another downside is the fact that the high-end smartphone market is becoming saturated, and Apple's bigger iPhone models are stepping on the toes of Korea's tech giants.
So, I mean, since you mentioned Samsung, let's talk about how Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor, they're the two big heavyweights here in Korea, how they're expected to do in 2015.
And their growth mostly depends on China, one of the world's biggest market, and Samsung is definitely losing their grip in China. Now, the company once controlled over a quarter of the market share, but is now lagging behind local manufacturers. Xiaomi, for example, topped China's market share at 15%, followed by Samsung at 13% in the third quarter. Now, as for the auto industry, domestic automakers face tough challenges in and out of the country. Hyundai and Kia Motors' combined market share fell below 70% for the first time in 7 years at home, as more and more Korean consumers are turning to European diesel models and SUVs with better fuel efficiency. Now, foreign brands' domestic share is expected to top 15% this year. And the automakers face tougher challenges in China, where local manufacturers are expanding their shares, backed by government support. And elsewhere on the globe, Hyundai and Kia must compete with Japanese automakers who aggressively price their vehicles, taking advantage of the weak yen.
So how will it be for other exporters? Where will they be feeling the pinch?
Well, actually, we are facing the biggest threats from near our country where the neighbors are. And if you take a look at this map, half of Korean export items compete with Japanese products on the international stage. So we can say virtually every single exporter will suffer from the cheap Japanese yen, and this year as well. And Chinese companies, on the other hand, are catching up with Korean manufacturers in terms of their technological advances while enjoying their cheap costs. And their output surpassed that of Korean rivals in the shipbuilding and auto sectors. So Korea now finds itself in a so-called nutcracker position between Japan and China.
Nutcracker position. So what are Korean manufacturers doing in order to beat those challenges?
Well, we've been hearing reform as the keyword from President Park Geun-hye since her inauguration, and that applies in the business realm as well. As industry analysts say, the name of the game is now choice and focus in order to overcome such times of crisis.
Companies must give up on sectors that are not performing well and focus their resources and manpower on sectors that are excelling in the market.
In fact, the overhaul has already started. Samsung, for instance, sold its petrochemical sector to Hanwha last year, while Hyundai Steel acquired Dongbu Special Steel. Now, such M&As and restructure will continue this year to enhance their efficiencies and proficiency as well.
All right, well, looks like a big hustle for companies to survive this year. Thanks so much, Ji-sun.
Anytime.
Indonesia has located the tail section of the AirAsia plane that crashed in the Java Sea, raising hopes of recovering the black box recorder.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, this discovery comes 10 days after Flight 8501 went missing. Is this the breakthrough investigators need to find out exactly what happened during the plane's final moments?
Well, officials say it potentially marks a major step in that direction. Teams will now be tasked with salvaging the crucial voice and flight data recorders, which are believed to be housed inside this piece of the plane. Amid improving weather conditions, the massive search operation also detected several other large sections of the jetliner off the coast of Borneo. This as one more body was found on this Wednesday. Indonesia's chief of national search and rescue said he was sure the underwater wreckage was from the AirAsia plane after spotting the company's logo.
We have found the tail of the plane. That has been our main target today. The tail part has been found and confirmed. It was in the second priority search area, not in the main priority area as media reported.
Indonesia's transport ministry announced earlier today that it fired one of its officials and disciplined others in the wake of this crash. The ministry is also investigating the state navigation operator and airport officials for allowing Flight 8501 to depart without permission. And turning to France, where authorities have in just the last few hours reported a deadly mass shooting in the heart of Paris. Prosecutors there say 12 people were killed and several others wounded when a group of armed men stormed the headquarters of a satirical magazine on Wednesday morning. Police are searching for the masked gunman who witnesses say escaped in multiple vehicles. It marks the second deadly attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices since 2011, after the weekly magazine drew anger from Muslims for using the image of the Prophet Muhammad. In the wake of the recent violence, France has raised its anti-terrorism alert to the country's highest level, while reinforcing security at media offices and transportation sites, among others. President Francois Hollande has condemned the killings as a terrorist attack and revealed that several other attacks have been prevented in recent weeks. And finally, researchers at Oxford have begun human testing of a new Ebola vaccine that aims to wipe out the deadly disease. Initial results have been promising in monkeys after subjects showed complete immune protection against the virus. Oxford says its latest trial is being conducted on 72 volunteers between the ages of 18 and 50. The developer of the vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, said it hopes to have the vaccine ready for use in the hardest hit Western African countries by the middle of this year. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome, I'm Stephen Che with a look at sports. Now the Asian Cup starts Friday with Group A kicking off the action. Joined by host nation Australia as well as Oman and Kuwait. How does South Korea stack up in the group? On the FIFA World Ranking, South Korea is the highest at 69th, but that's proven not to be a reliable measure of performance. However, home field advantage is an undeniable factor, so Australia is expected to shed off their finals loss in 2011 and make a run for the trophy. And speaking of that, Kuwait can't be overlooked as they won it back in 1980 at home as well. But they haven't finished in the top four since 1996. And lagging behind the others, Oman is the dark horse here to emerge as one of the two teams that will advance to the knockout stage. And moving on to the KBL hardcourt. For the first of the doubleheader, let's head to the tip-off in Jeonju. Now the KCC Aegis hosted the Goyang Orions, and the visitors shoot to the lead and never look back. 5 players hit double figures as the Orions win on the road. Meanwhile, in Anyang, the visiting LG Sagers make it rain against KGC, shooting 65% from the field. Jefferson and Moon combined for 56 as LG wins by 17 points. Heading to pro volleyball in the V-League, we go to Daejeon for 2 matches. First to the ladies. Korea Ginseng Corporation faced the Hyundai ENC Hill State, and the Hill State build up the 2-0 lead behind Polina Rahimova. Hyundai ENC drop one, but end up taking it in 4 sets. And for the men, the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs overpower the KEPCO Vic Storm for the 3-1 victory. It's their 5th win in a row as the Blue Fangs start to pull away at number 1. Lastly, the National Baseball Hall of Fame welcomed Craig Biggio, Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez, and John Smoltz this year. Next year, Korean pitcher Park Chan-ho will have a shot to join them. Along with headliners Ken Griffey Jr. and Trevor Hoffman, it will be his first year up for consideration for baseball's hallowed hall. Joining the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1994 as the first Korean in the majors, Park amassed a major league record for Asians with 124 wins. The Pioneer retired in 2012, last playing for the KBO's Hanwha Eagles. And that's all I have for now. Your weather's up next. Have a good night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather forecast. Well, skies are looking nice and clear, but freezing conditions continue to stick around. In fact, cold wave watch is in effect for parts of the central regions where overnight temperatures may drop below -10 degrees. Other than that, dry weather advisories continue to be in effect along the eastern coast. This cold snap is set to reach its peak tomorrow, and morning lows here in Seoul should dip to -9, but conditions are set to jump back to seasonal average norms by Friday afternoon. On to Thursday's readings, Seoul will only mix it to 0, while Daegu and Gwangju hit 6. On to other places, Jeju peaks at 8, Dokdo 5, Mount Kumgang dips to -5. That'll do it for now, and more updates coming up after midnight. See you then.
All right, that's primetime news for this Wednesday. I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Kang Tae-ri. Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.